All right, I see the recorded button going, so I'm going to go ahead and get started.
Yep. Hi.
Welcome, friends. My name is Chris Harris. I am on the board of directors of TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship, and I am here from Christ Church Cranbrook in Bloomfield Hills, which is in Metro Detroit. And I am joined here today by Matthew Woodward from Trinity Cathedral in Sacramento, California, my old stomping ground. And we're just having a conversation about children and youth and stewardship, a vitally important topic as we all know. And so Matthew.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, yeah.
Nice to meet you. And always lovely to see inside people's like Zoom spaces and see what's going on behind you in your space. I wonder what youth and family dynamics you think are present in stewardship.
You know, the first thing that always comes to mind is a favorite story of mine of one of our youth. He was somebody who had kind of gone through the Sunday school program for years, and for whatever reason, one night at dinner at home, they're sitting down for dinner, the family, and he says to his mom and dad, you know, would you guys be okay if we prayed before dinner? And they were like, wow, absolutely, sure, why not? Why don't you go ahead and lead us? And it was an interesting story. It's kind of a fun story because it's a reminder to me that our youth can be leaders. They can be formational leaders at home. It's not always a one-way conversation. And of course, you know, the hope, of course, is that as kids become good stewards, they can actually be a voice for stewardship in their own home sometimes. What is your thoughts on that? What is your response on that?
Well, I agree with that totally. I've got two kind of strong ideas about children's and youth work that I like to keep in mind. One is that sometimes we silo off children into separate spaces. And, you know, I think developmentally appropriate teaching is really good, but intergenerational worship is important to me because everybody should worship together. We're all worshiping together, and children are developing their spirituality alongside adults and actually are capable of quite sophisticated spiritual development and growth. That's one thing I think that's important. We should join it all up. And the second thing is that sometimes we think children are empty vessels we have to fill with knowledge. What do we think they need to know? But actually, I find that they're often experimenting with faith and exploring it, and they have fascinating questions themselves. So I think that about children's and youth work, and I also think it about stewardship. What do these children think about money and their values? Have we stopped to ask them? Should we have a conversation at home that's joined up as well? Like often the model is kind of like kids go to bed and parents talk about money. But why not talk about money with the children present, particularly when it comes to stewardship and giving? And instead of saying, this is what we think we're going to do as a family, saying to the children, what are our values as a family? What do we believe as a family? And therefore, where should we put our money? You were talking to me earlier on about having a spiritual biography and looking to your childhood and thinking how you formed your views on money. Would you say more about that? Because that fascinated me.
Yeah, it's kind of a simple exercise. I actually learned it at a TENS conference years ago. But the idea is you take out a piece of paper and you answer kinds of questions like this. What was your first memory around money?
Right.
What was one of the first lessons you learned around money? What did your parents teach you? Was it a message of scarcity or was it a message of abundance? Did you have a piggy bank? Was there anything ever in it? What was your first experience around giving?
Mm-hmm.
Can you remember that? I remember my grandmother, for example, always making sure I went over to the Salvation Army, you know, the little red bucket around Christmas time. That was my first memory around giving. However, I was always giving her money away because she would give me somebody to put in the bucket, right? So it was my first memory. I first learned the way to give is to give someone else's money away. So it would have been an interesting thing, right? If she had invited me to take some of my allowance and if that had become a practice. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I love what you're saying around how do we bring this kinds of conversation home around the dinner table where we have all of our important family meetings. How do we involve kids in this conversation, both around giving as a spiritual practice for themselves as just a way of being in the world, but also how do we maybe come together as a family and as we think about our budget conversation, instead of sending them off to bed, inviting the kids to sit down and say, okay, kids, we want to make some decisions around how we give our money away as well.
Yeah.
And here's why. What do you think about that? What's the causes that are on your mind or on your heart? I think that would be a powerful way of teaching good stewardship to kids. And by the way, it's a parallel, isn't it, to what we do in the church?
Absolutely. I want to pause and say one thing about what you just said that I really liked, and then I want to, yes, answer that question. And I think what you just said is that if we look back at our own spiritual biography, we can remember the ways we were taught. Let's create some spaces for our children now that they might look back on fondly from the future and recognize that they got some valuable lessons around the dining table or when they're out in the street and deciding what to do with money. So I like that. And then yes, absolutely. I think there's a parallel between what we do at home in the family meeting and what we do in church at the stewardship gathering or the stewardship meeting. And I think we can sometimes say to our children that they should be off in a separate space while the adults talk about the money. But I think if you actually talked to children in church, you would find that they can get from the values that are being taught to where we should put our resources way faster sometimes than the adults do. And I think of it in two ways. I like to think of the church as doing, I mean, obviously many things, but one of them is personal spiritual formation. And we should remind people that coming to church is a place where you can process your emotions, you can think about who you are as a person, who you want to be, how you want to grow. And we have those conversations in Sunday school and with children. And also, how closely do we match our values with what we do with everybody outside the church? How much are we engaged in mission? And I think children get there faster sometimes than adults do. They can link up their values with what they think we should be giving quicker. And they can see when we're not living up to our values in terms of the way that we're supporting charities around about the church or the way that we're living into our mission in church. So I think what I say about adults and giving is that adults like to give to a place that has a vision or a mission. I think children, even more so, they want to see where it is that the money's going and that it really counts and it's really important. Does that relate with what you were thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of reminds me of the old, thing about how a preacher will sometimes use the children's sermon to actually give a message to the parents listening, right?
Yeah.
As you were talking, it kind of makes me wonder, what if, at our next, annual pledge campaign, what if we were to send the children home with a little worksheet to do with the family around the dinner table, where it was almost like a discernment exercise for how are they going to give to the church this year, and offer some conversation starters around values and what's the impact, what's the mission of the church, what are we doing in the world that's changing lives, and how are we going to give to it. I think that would be a fun idea.
Yes. Can I interject and say one thing about that, because I love that? It also makes me think, how do we prepare all of our stewardship material? All of our stewardship material is often full of like spreadsheets and pie charts and prose. How can we actually make sure that our stewardship material for children and adults links values and mission up to giving much more closely, so that all of the material could be sent home and the family could sit around the table and talk about it in a meaningful way?
That was.
Also, I'm really mindful that we're running out of time, and I just want to say it's really nice meeting you, and I've had a really great conversation about children and stewardship. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the work that the TENS board does and that you do in TENS. People, if you would like to have a bit more material on stewardship, you can go to tens.org, TENS.org, and find lots of material there. Thank you so much, Chris, for your time. It's great to meet you.
This has been fantastic. Let's do it again sometime.